Pin your fabric right sides together and stitch along the side seams and the shoulder seams on both sides. We need to interface the front feature piece before we sew it on. So if you've never used interfacing, I'll go over it quickly here. This is fusible interfacing. So this side is bumpy, that's basically glue. So fusible interfacing causes things to be stiffer, and in this case, it can stop fraying as well, and will make this a lot easier to work with. So this is the bumpy side, that's the glue side. I'm putting it down on this. So there's my right side, wrong side, gluey side. And we melt it with the iron, but don't put your iron on yet. You need to put on a press cloth. I take a scrap of fabric, I put an X on it, and put that side down. That's my gluey side, because otherwise it will mess up. You'll get glue on your iron, and I might have to clean up my ironing board or switch out this cloth later as well. So you can put a scrap fabric here if you want to too. I'm just gonna hold it for about 10 seconds in place and keep going along. And we are also going to do the same thing for one of our band pieces. Same thing for the band to go in the back, which will have buttonholes on it. Anytime I do buttonholes, I want to have interfacing. And here I cut the interfacing actually a little bit smaller than the fabric piece. That way you're interfacing in the seam allowance. It will be a little bit less bulky. So again, there's my yucky press cloth side, and this side is clean. Once we have interfaced our front design piece, and we've trimmed up the edges a little bit if it was fraying anywhere, we are going to match it up. So I'm just going to, that's where I marked it with thread before, and I'm going to pin that in place. And we can stitch it down at the machine. I am going to choose a very narrow zigzag stitch for this. Just that will help prevent any fraying around the edges. So now I've gone ahead and I've serged the center back seam. We're going to put the zipper in. If you are binding instead of serging your seam, you can leave that until after the zipper is in. So I put my pin in horizontally here. This is where the zipper is going to stop. So from the neckline down to where the zipper stops, we're just going to use a machine basting stitch, back stitch, and use a regular stitch length to the bottom of the hem. Now we need to put in our zipper. So I've got an invisible zipper here, and I've gone ahead and I've centered the zipper right with the seam, which is right here with a pin. And I've pinned it just to the seam allowance, not all the way through. I'm not going to stitch it down from the top. I'm going to do an invisible style. So this is the way that I do it, and I'm going to baste it in here by hand with a contrasting thread. I find it just is much easier to sew in your zipper this way if you take the extra just couple minutes just to hand baste this in. To stitch the zipper on, once we've basted it, I've got the machine set up so I am just sewing through the seam allowance and the zipper. I'm not sewing through the top side. And I've got my zipper foot here, and that's butted up right against the zipper. Once you approach the end where the zipper slider is, if you keep going, you'll end up sewing around it, and it'll be kind of this weird bump here. So what I do is I open up the basting seam just past where your needle is. You want to slide it down. Lift your foot up, slide it down. Okay, I've slid the slider down here, so now it's easier for me to keep sewing to the end. You want your zipper, you want your needle to be as close to the zipper without actually sewing the zipper. Now to sew the other side, I'm going to keep that zipper slider where it was. And again, I'm only sewing the seam allowance here. And I'm going to start sewing at the top, sew to where the slider is, slide it up, and then keep going. Now we're ready to bind our neckline and our armholes. So I've taken some bias tape and I've pressed it open along the top edge. And I'm going to fold this edge in here and pin it right by the zipper. And we're going to pin it all the way around and then stitch in the folded edge. Now I've pinned this in all the way around the neckline. After we'll do the same thing on the armholes. So we're just going to stitch along this edge here and then flip it over to the inside. Right now I am pressing my bias binding the stitch line. I'm pushing the seam allowance up into the bias, towards the bias binding, and then we're going to flip it down. And you can see this edge right here is the good side. So we're going to fold it down and top stitch along here. So to finish off the hem of the dress, we are going to just do an easy double turn hem and just top stitch that all the way around. Once we have our dress assembled, we're going to make the little tab that goes on the back. So I have two pieces here, and this one I've applied fusible interfacing on already. And we're just going to put them right sides together and stitch around with a small seam allowance, about 1/4 inch, and leave it open, leave an opening so that we can turn it right side out. So I'm just going to sew it from, I'm going to leave this part open and stitch from here all the way around. I'll be right back. Okay, so I've stitched that around the edge, and now we're going to open it up here and bag it out. So flip it right sides out. Then we will press it again and top stitch around the whole thing. I don't want to poke my pencil through, but just something to go in the corners. Okay, now I'm going to, you can either sew this by hand or top stitch it. So now I've top stitched that around so that closes the little opening that we had, and I've pressed it. Now it's time to get our buttons. So these are the two that I'm going to be using. And we'll be sewing the buttons onto the dress, but we're going to use them here first, just to get the placement. So I think I'm going to make mine 1 inch in. I'm using chalk here, so this will brush off after. And from the halfway point. When we make a buttonhole, the way I like to do it is to measure your button and then make your buttonhole 1/8 inch bigger. So that makes mine just under, you know, I'm going to make it, it's like just shy of 1 inch long. So I'm going to do that on both sides. Okay, so once we have marked our buttonholes, we are going to go to the machine and make a buttonhole. Once you cut your buttonholes open, I used some really small scissors for mine here, or you can use a stitch ripper. I've marked it in half, just fold it in half and stick a pin in it. And here is where it should go according to the pattern. And I'm just going to place that there. And we're going to button this on. And so this marking here, just use this as a guideline, the marking that's in the pattern. You can, if you want to, you can try this on first and figure out if you want this a little bit higher or lower. Just keep in mind of the zipper here. So I'm just going to make sure it's just one layer of fabric. I grab both layers there, just in the middle, to sew your button on. And then do the same on the other side.